One, her flesh and blood. And now, Sylvia Chase.
I first met the woman in this story 3 years ago, and I've been haunted by her ever since. In 1997, Darlie Routier was convicted of a crime so horrific and so inexplicable that people still argue about it. 2 boys, 5 and 6, were brutally murdered, stabbed repeatedly as they slept in their suburban Dallas home. Their mother, 26-year-old Darlie, was said to be the cold-blooded killer, and she's now on death row. It was a strong circumstantial case, but no witnesses and no real motive. It left me wondering if Darlie Routier had really killed her boys. And it seems I have company.
There is an innocent woman on death row in the state of Texas, and her name is Darlie Routier.
I don't know who did it, but Darlie Routier didn't do it.
It's a case that refuses to die. 3 years after her conviction, Darlie Routier is the talk of Texas.
New developments tonight in the Darlie Routier case.
There's evidence that has some people close to this case changing their mind about her guilt.
With news she may have to be tried all over again. Her prosecutor says she'd still be found guilty.
There is nothing new.
But her supporters say new evidence of her innocence is piling up in books about the case. Even a For Darlie website featuring a colorful cast of characters who were once against her. A true crime writer whose book condemned Darlie as the killer, who now insists she's innocent. And a tormented juror who sentenced her to death and now swears he was wrong too. But one thing hasn't changed. Darlie still insists, as she did to me after her trial, that she could never have harmed her boys.
Now do you see me?
Yeah.
Devin was always trying to make everybody laugh. He was always doing funny things, making silly faces. Damon was still at the age where he would let me hold him still. Oh, God. I miss him so much. I swear I did not murder my children, I swear.
So what did happen in small-town Rowlett, Texas? It began as just an ordinary night for Darlie Routier. Her husband and 7-month-old were asleep upstairs, and Darlie says she and her sons Damon and Devin had fallen asleep downstairs in front of the TV in the family room. Then, at 2:31 a.m., Darlie phoned 911.
911, what is your emergency? They just stabbed me in my cabin. What? They just stabbed me in my cabin. Who did?
The very first thing I hear is a glass break.
Darlie's husband, Darren, sleeping upstairs.
And then I hear a scream of Darlie screaming as loud as she can.
It came from the family room downstairs, where, remember, Darlie and the boys had fallen asleep watching TV.
I'm coming downstairs, running straight over to Devin. And when I get to Devin, there's these big gashes, and there's blood all over.
Oh, my God.
Devin was dead, stabbed twice in the chest with such force the knife went through to the carpet. Damon had been stabbed too, 4 times in the back. He was clinging to life. Darlie's throat had been slashed, yet she was frantically calling for help. Police and medical personnel arrived within minutes. Paramedic Jack Colby went straight to Damon.
I could still see that there was some light in those eyes. And I remember thinking that, this kid's a fighter and he wants to live.
Damon died before he reached the hospital. And Darlie might have died, except the knife stopped 2 millimeters short of her carotid artery. When she came out of surgery, police were waiting to question her.
What woke you up?
My little boy, Damon. He was pressing on my shoulder, and he was saying, Mommy. I sat straight up when he said that.
She says that in the dark, she didn't notice she was hurt. Then she saw a man moving through the kitchen and followed him as he went through a door and into the garage. She saw a knife and picked it up. Only then, she said, did she return to find Devin, who was dead, and Damon dying, and realized that she too was wounded. Darlie says she tried to comfort Damon.
I told him to hold on. strong. And he said, okay, Mommy. And he shook his head. That was the last words I ever heard him say.
Everything she said that occurred that night does not fit anything at the scene.
James Cron was the crime scene analyst. He suspected a struggle had been staged. A screen window had been slashed, suggesting an intruder. But how could an intruder leave dust undisturbed on that windowsill, or get through an outside gate that was difficult to open?
I mean, could it be any worse?
Greg Davis, Assistant District Attorney for Dallas.
The evidence pointed one direction only, Darlie Routier.
Beginning with the murder weapon, a knife from the kitchen counter with Darlie's fingerprints. Davis felt she was oddly concerned about that as her sons lay dying.
Okay, it's all right. It's okay. We got the prints, baby.
Darlie and her husband Darren spoke freely to detectives without hiring a lawyer.
Happy birthday to you.
Then, 8 days after the murders, on what would have been Devon's 7th birthday, there at the graveside, Darlie spraying silly string.
Love you, Devin and Damon.
I was in disbelief.
It was on the local news, and the prosecutor was watching.
If you knew Devin and Damon, you would know that they're up in heaven, and they're up there having the biggest birthday party that we could ever imagine.
No grieving mother can do that, in my opinion.
This evening, investigators from the Rowlett Police Department arrested Darlie Routier.
4 days later, Darlie Routier was charged with capital murder.
We also believe that the wounds present on Darlie Routier were self-inflicted.
Darlie's mother-in-law, Cyrilda, briefly took over raising Darlie's toddler, Drake, who'd slept upstairs unharmed the night of the murders. Neither she nor Darlie's mother, Darlie Key, ever doubted her innocence.
She said, "Mom, I saw a man. I did not do this to the boys."
The families even mortgaged their homes to pay for lawyers when Darlie went to trial in January of 1997 in conservative Kerrville, Texas. The prosecution's case centered on Darlie herself, depicted as a pampered wife living beyond her means, suffering from postpartum depression and angry about her husband's declining computer business.
This is a woman who was used to a certain lifestyle, and she couldn't live that lifestyle the way she wanted.
It was powerful stuff. And when Darlie took the stand, she didn't help herself. Under cross-examination, she dissolved in tears.
If I had done this to my children, I would be the first person to stand up and say, oh my God, I need help. What have I done? You know, a mother couldn't live with herself.
But now, Darlie, they're saying that you could live with it because you're a psychopath and that you could kill and not have a conscience
sure, that
about
fits
it.
their theory.
For the jurors, it was a theory apparently bolstered by that notorious videotape of Darlie at the gravesite. They watched it over and over again. And then, after a 9-hour deliberation, the guilty verdict. But even going off to death row, Darlie protested her innocence.
I didn't murder my children.
And now Sylvia Chase has found some dramatic holes in the case against Darlie Routier. When we come back, a bloody fingerprint found at the scene. Who did it belong to? And what about these pictures of Darlie's arms? This juror says he doesn't remember seeing them.
That told me that she didn't hurt herself, that she threw her arms up like this to protect herself.
Her Flesh and Blood continues. Once again, Sylvia Chase.
It's been 3 years since Darlie Routier was sentenced to death for the murder of her 2 sons. As we continue our story, her case takes twists and turns like a Texas tornado. New developments put doubt in the minds of people once convinced of her guilt. Just imagine being a juror who sentenced a woman to death, only to find out you just couldn't live with your decision.
Mom and Dad always told me, said, if you do something wrong, stand up for it. And be accounted and make it right if you can.
A few months after juror Charlie Samford condemned Darlie Routier to death row, he told her the other jurors browbeat him into it.
We cried, and he apologized to me.
Darlie Routier forgave him, too. In 3 years behind bars, she's prayed hard, grown weary, let her hair go natural. But she has never changed her story.
I did not murder Devin and Damon. I did not attack myself.
She was innocent and not guilty.
But Charlie says the jurors kept playing this tape and challenging his notion that an innocent woman could act this way.
She wasn't grieving, spraying the city string and gnawing on that chewing gum.
What the jury didn't see was this surveillance video of Darlie. Police had secretly taped the gravesite for hours that day. There was weeping, praying, preaching.
Father, may this day of birthday be a day of rejoicing.
There was Darlie's sister. The silly string was her idea. The dead boys had loved it.
I got you some snaps with some silly string, okay?
But this video was not okay. There were questions about its legality. And when the trial judge raised them, there was a heated argument in the courtroom.
The two police officers pled the Fifth Amendment.
Stephen Cooper is one of Darlie's new attorneys. Wait a minute. You're saying that the police officers...
Lead investigator in this case pled the Fifth Amendment and refused...
About the videotape that the police department had made?
Correct.
Why did he do that?
He was persuaded that he was exposed to criminal prosecution for his acts.
And the video was never entered into evidence. The police were not charged. So the sad Darlie was never seen by the jury, and the bad Darlie got big play.
He wanted to be 7. I did the only thing I knew to do to honor him and give him those wishes because he wasn't here anymore. But how do you know what you're going to do when you lose 2 children? How do you know how you're going to act? And who's to say there's a rule book to grieving? Who's to say if you don't follow these guidelines, that makes you a bad parent or that makes you a murderer?
This jury was not paying enough attention to the evidence that really mattered.
Such as photos of Darlie's bruises, says defense attorney Stephen Loesch. State's photo evidence, 52 series.
She didn't hurt herself, that she threw her arms up like this to protect herself. That told me that she didn't do it.
Charlie Samford says he never saw these pictures during the trial.
The black arms? Yeah, see, they didn't show us that in the trial. We didn't see that.
You see, that's impossible for me to believe.
Prosecutor Greg Davis.
Because, as you know, those photographs were introduced at the trial. They were available to all the jurors.
Is it possible, Charlie, that the only ones that you remember are those?
No, we didn't see those.
Something that is put into evidence simply means that it's marked and turned in. Never means the jury sees it.
Barbara Davis is a true crime writer whose book Precious Angels said Darlie was the killer. She says she never saw the photos either.
It's a pretty damaging photograph in my eyes.
What does it say to you?
It says to me she put up one hell of a fight with somebody. She didn't do that to herself.
These photos convinced Barbara Davis that Darlie Routier was innocent.
I got it wrong. I believed it. I went along with a theory, and the more I found, the worse it got. And I'm thinking, how can this happen in our judicial system in America?
Which brings us to Darlie's husband, Darren. Broke, caring for surviving son Drake, age 4. To save his wife, Darren turned to Brian Pardo, a wealthy Waco man, to fund a reinvestigation of Darlie's case. Turns out there's a catch, and it's a big one.
He's making me the #1 suspect, just like the police did Darlie.
That's right. Pardo decided Darren did it. He insisted Darren take a lie detector test, which courts have ruled is unreliable and inadmissible.
I was told that if I didn't, there would be no more money for the investigation. I did it to help Darlie.
Did you yourself stab Darlie on June 6, 1996? No.
The polygraph examiner said Darren was lying and turned on him.
Because you were involved in it.
No, I was
yeah,
not.
You were.
And in what way?
In what way?
Yeah.
You helped plan it, and you were there when it happened, and you helped carry it out. And you stabbed your wife.
No, I did not.
Oh, yeah, you did.
No, I didn't.
I find it fascinating. I can accuse you of stabbing your wife and trying to kill her, and you can sit there and smile at me.
Do you still have the faith that you expressed in our first interview that your husband had nothing to do with this?
Yes.
Absolutely, no doubts.
No.
In the beginning, Darren and Darlie were both suspects, even though a bloody fingerprint on the coffee table suggested another person might have been on the murder scene that night. An investigator testified he couldn't identify the fingerprint, but 2020 consulted 2 veteran New York City police fingerprint experts. Retired detective Bob Lonis. Do you feel that you could make an identification with this print?
Yes, I do.
Retired officer Arthur Hagenlocker.
I could, yes.
We asked them to take a hard look at the bloody print. Did it match Darlie or Darren?
The latent print does not belong to either one of those 2 people.
So who else could it be?
It could very well be a child's print.
That's what the police investigator testified. But the problem is, the dead boys were never fingerprinted. A misfortune in the opinion of these 2 experts, both of whom found what they call points on the bloody print. 7 points, possibly an 8th, borderline, but good enough to run it through a state computerized print file for comparisons.
I would run this through everything if there was 2 children killed.
And you?
Yes, I would.
And I would keep this print on my desk, and every time someone got arrested, I would compare this against the prints every day.
That's how valuable you think this print is?
Yes, yes.
In a Dallas courtroom last Friday, the subject was perhaps the most peculiar of all the strange developments in this case, the severely flawed transcript of Darlie Routier's 1997 trial. Court reporter Sandra Halsey's trial transcript was marked by 33,000 mistakes and missing audio tapes. But she may turn out to be the best friend Darlie Routier ever had. The flawed transcript may force the court to order a totally new trial for Darlie.
I'm preparing to fight this, and I'm preparing to exonerate myself and to show my innocence.
I don't know who did it, but Darlie Routier didn't do it.
If it should happen that she does go to the death chamber, how will you handle that?
I hope she don't, so I don't have to find out.
No execution date will be set for Darlie Routier until the issue of the trial transcripts